Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 213 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us. Actually, it's not us this week. I'm writing solo at the moment. Mike's schedule is kind of a little bit conflicted, so I'm writing solo this week, but not completely solo because we do have a guest of the week. He is a writer and reporter for ESPN covering boxing, soccer, and baseball. His work has appeared in the Best American Sports Writing, and he has been a finalist for the Dan Jenkins Medal for Excellence in Sports Writing. He is based in El Paso, Texas, and has previously written for ESPN platforms on a freelance basis before being hired by ESPN. And he also, one of his primary boxing articles within the last 2 years or so is on Canelo Alvarez, entitled Canelo Alvarez and the Mystical Man Behind His Quest for Immortality. Roberto, José, Andrade, Franco joins us this week on the Last Round. I appreciate you joining us, man.
Thank you for having me, man.
We appreciate it. So I just listed some of your accomplishments. I'm sure you have a lot more and how you got to where you're at. Obviously, a lot of our listeners and everybody around the world who listens to this podcast is aware that ESPN, especially in the United States, is essentially the worldwide leader in sports. They're very notable. Can you tell us how you got involved in the journalism, I guess, field? Like how were you always interested in it, or how did you? And then how you got to ESPN as of today?
I don't know if lucked into it, but I definitely did not grow up wanting to be a writer. I come from El Paso. I come from a working class family, and after high school, I was working construction for 10 years. I left to Phoenix and worked as an electrician, worked as a day laborer for a few years. And my last job, I was a highway construction foreman. And then the contract expired with the city and it didn't get renewed. And I was 28 years old. And I was like, well, I guess if I ever wanted to go to college, this is it. And so I enrolled in El Paso Community College. I found out that I liked to study, which was kind of like a surprise to me because in high school I was kind of like an average student, right? I mean, I passed my classes mostly because I wanted to keep playing football or sports. And once I got to community college, and then from there I transferred to UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso, and then for a while, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a high school teacher. And then I wanted to be a professor because one of the professors that I had suggested that I should take the PhD program. I looked into that, and I did that at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And even then, I went out there and I was like, I kind of want to be a professor. I got there like a month, 6 weeks into it, and I realized I was like, oh man, I don't want to do this shit. But I wanted to finish the program. But halfway, not even halfway, probably like about a couple of months into it, one of my professors kind of pulled me aside, said that essentially I was going to flunk out because my writing was so bad. And then she suggested that I just write as often as I can about anything. And I've always grown up as a boxing fan. So I just wrote about boxing. I started writing for this website that's still around, the Boxing Voice. And I just started writing from there. And then I just, I realized that's what I wanted to do. Even when I went to college, even when I was going to be a high school teacher or a professor, that really wasn't like my passion or anything. That was all like, it's better than working construction outdoors type of thing. Right. And once I started writing, I realized that was what I loved to do. So I just kept going, and it kind of made sense. It wasn't. It's very difficult to make a living writing, but it was like a sacrifice that really wasn't a sacrifice because that's what I wanted to do. I kept writing, working my way up, going from like I mentioned, the boxing voice, which didn't pay me anything. But I mean, just to be clear, I wasn't expecting to get paid. And then I was like, just started sending ideas and pitches to other places that actually paid me. And then, kind of moving up with ESPN, I ended up, I got an email from them around 2020, 2021, saying that they were looking for ideas, and whatever wildest idea I had on a topic that I wanted to write about, to just send it to them. And I sent them that idea, that pitch on Canelo Alvarez, which I ultimately wrote. And that was like, I never thought that I'd like get welcomed into his gym or have some time with him. So that to me was like the wildest writing idea that I could have. And they're like, yeah, man, go do it. And wrote a couple other things for them, and ended up with the job. Basically, they were like, yeah, if you're interested in this position that we have, we might have we could bring you on. It's like, yeah, man. I mean, so that was, I think that was the big surprise to me, to be honest, because I don't know, it wasn't. It'd be a lie to call it a dream come true, because I never thought to like work at ESPN or write for such a major place like that. And so yeah, been there about a year and a month now, and that's how I ended up here.
So it was kind of by accident, because like you said, they kind of reached out to you for like a story pitch, and you sent it back saying, "Oh, okay, yeah, this is what I was thinking," and it just kind of was all kind of rolled from there, right?
Well, it was by accident. I would say more that I started writing, but once I got that pitch, I understood that it was my chance, right? Once it was like, oh, okay, I might have a shot to actually work here, even if not at a full-time basis, at least like at a freelancer, get steady work with them. So I understood that. I was like, man, if I mess this one up, I might not get a second chance. So yeah, and it worked out.
So have you ever asked maybe any of your colleagues or anybody higher up in ESPN, like, hey, how did you guys get wind of me? Read my articles, because obviously getting noticed by them and having them reach out to you in that fashion, it's very specific.
I have not asked, but I think this was brought up during the interview process, which was like, it was like a 3-month-long interview process where I was just I probably spoke with like 10 people at ESPN. And the first person the person who ended up hiring me, he had read some article that was nominated for the National Magazine Award, which is a pretty major, I think it's probably the biggest award that you could win as a magazine writer, that I had written about. And this was before ESPN. I was working with Texas Highways, which is a Texas tourism magazine. And I wrote an article for them about the El Paso shooting and a year after. And that's an article that got me that recognition. And I'm assuming that's where they kind of found out.
What would you say? Because you said, I would consider you probably a late bloomer in education. Do you think there are late bloomers in education, or do you think you're never too old to just, start it and keep going?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I was a late bloomer, for sure. I think a lot of that had to do with having realistic goals, right? Once I actually got into my 20s, like, well, shit, I'm probably not going to be a boxer or be an NFL player. Then it became like, all right, well, I don't want to work construction the rest of my life either if I can help it. And yeah, I mean, working construction really gave me, what's the word? It set things, man, I can't think of the word, right? It gave me a good comparison of like, had I gone to college right after high school, I think, and not knowing what I wanted to do, I probably would have flunked out, right? But once I get to college and I'm 28 and I'm 29, 30, all of a sudden, I've been working in Phoenix outdoor and it's 112 degrees. All of a sudden, having to read a couple of chapters, it's not really that big of a deal, right? So it gives you perspective. That's the word I was looking for. Gave me a different perspective, right? So yeah, late bloomers. It's not too late. Sometimes it's just circumstance, right? I've been very fortunate with not just my career, but also the opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of for a variety of reasons. I could have ended up having a kid at 21 and I would have made it a lot more difficult. So, a lot of that has to do, or at least in my opinion, it has to do with that I've been very fortunate to, and lucky to be able to pursue this.
You mentioned you wrote the article on Canelo Alvarez. It looks like it was at the end of 2021. You touched on that you were able to go to his gym, so you were able to actually cover him intimately like that?
Yeah. So this was that article actually got approved prior to the pandemic, and then when he was supposed to fight Billy Joe Saunders like Cinco de Mayo of 2020. Of course, that's when. So that article was just kind of out there lingering, or that job was out there lingering for a good, I don't know, six months, a year. So once I finally got out there, I was able to talk to him for a bit. They let me hang out at the gym for a few hours. I didn't really get like that much one-on-one time so far as like hours and stuff. But excuse me. And this is a good tip if anybody's ever thinking about writing. I just basically hung out there till they told me to leave. Right? They didn't kick me out or anything. But when you're like, all right, this guy's kind of hanging out too much. So yeah, I hung out there for hours while he's training and saw how he interacts with not just Eddie Reynoso, but the whole crew that he had around him at that point, which some of that has changed now so far as who's in his camp. But that was it. I San Diego and hung out there for, I want to say like 4 or 5 hours before I started noticing that they were looking at me funny. I was like, all right, I should probably leave before I get told to leave.
Did you get starstruck?
No. It was I get nervous. Not starstruck so far as like you can't talk, but definitely nerves, or at least with me. I'm trying to think. I don't really get starstruck. I've gotten very nervous. The most nervous I've ever been was actually I wrote a story about a softball player from a little girl who was one of the murder victims in the Uvalde. And when I spoke to their family, that was like the most nerves I've ever felt, just because the situation and all that. But so far as with boxers, no. I mean, I've never had any bad experience with boxers. Right? They've never been. They're always humble. They're always. I'm trying to think of. So no, that was never. Starstruck was never. I mean, you know who he is, right? And it's not like it's not like it was just some other guy either. But no, and Canelo was actually, very, he was very nice to me, right? He comes in the gym, he shakes your hand, and I mean, he knows he's a professional. He knows what day's media day and what he has to say, or that it's, very much a part of his job as the face of boxing. Definitely then, I would argue he still is now, but definitely at a different phase of his career now. But he knows what it is, right? He knows that this is, I got to sell this fight. This is part of the job.
Is there anything that stood out or stands out from those 4 or 5 hours time frame that you were there covering him inside of his gym? Because you're one of maybe a handful of people, if you kind of look at it from a perspective like that has ever had access to his gym like that. No, not a lot of people get access to somebody with the talent of Canelo.
I think he was. I wasn't surprised about this, but I knew one of the reasons I wanted to write this story was because I felt that, I mean, people have written about Canelo for what, 12 years now, right? And there was always something about it that I always felt was not off, but missing, which was his relationship to Reynoso and how he got along, right? Canelo is a very, at least the way he comes across in all of these interviews, he's a very just kind of, what's the word? Kind of almost like straight up guy, right? Where he just answers. And I think part of that has to do, this was before he was giving interviews in English. So he's kind of opened up a little bit, but there was very much a barrier, I felt, right? A cultural one between whatever's lost in translation. I thought that was what was missing. So when I got there, I just spoke to him in Spanish. I think that helped him. That helped the whatever connection we had, definitely with Reynoso, and just kind of hanging out there and seeing how they got along, how it was away from the quotes, right, that you hear all the time, basically. At that point, he was about to fight Caleb Plant. So, all the common quotes that you hear is like, yes, he's a very good boxer. He's very skilled, but we're not afraid of him, kind of thing. So I felt I was able to see the other side of Canelo a little bit. Not, once again, I don't want to make it seem like I saw something that no one had ever seen before, but I do think speaking Spanish with him, and basically them being comfortable around me enough that they wouldn't tell me to leave immediately, I think that definitely helped.
Yeah, it kind of breaks down the barrier enough because you're speaking their language, so it's a little easier to communicate. That's absolutely true, especially in a sport such as boxing with so many different cultures of fighters. It's if you know their native language and can communicate, sufficiently, you can definitely get a lot more out of them. So I definitely understand that. So let's jump into the news and everything going on in this boxing world. And let me get your take on some of this stuff, Roberto. So let's go to fight reviews. This past Saturday, the 18th of March, from the Agenda Arena in Dubai, UAE, on ProBox TV, Jarrell Big Baby Miller in a heavyweight matchup gets the 6-round TKO over Lucas Browns. So Jarrell Miller, Roberto, I'm sure you remember his name. He's the one who tested positive for several banned substances. And
for the Anthony Joshua fight, right?
Correct. Yeah, this was supposed to be Anthony Joshua's American debut. Obviously, he had that debut with Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz took advantage of the opportunity and obviously changed his life completely. But Jarrell Big Baby Miller, and this wasn't this. He tested positive for that fight, and then Top Rank subsequently, sometime after, tried to give him a shot to put him on the ESPN platform, and he tested positive again. So it was consecutive tests, and he's kind of been blacklisted ever since. So which I'm assuming why he had to fight over there in the United Arab Emirates area. What do you think about Big Baby Miller, Roberto? Do you think? I think he's in his mid 30s, possibly maybe 34, 35. Do you think he's going to get another opportunity with any of these major promoters or major broadcasters? Or do you think the damage that he did with those positive tests in back-to-back fights, essentially, do you think that's just too much to overcome?
I would say it's too much to overcome, but I mean, unless the major fights between the top six happen, then, somebody's going to have to fight someone. And I guess he could step in at one point, but I mean, so far as his reputation, I mean, I don't see how you can, not that you can't come back from it, but how you could come back to a certain point of legitimacy, right? That if he were to somehow get a shot and somehow win, people are still talking about Canelo and Fury to a lesser extent, so, and that he failed, multiple times. I think, and he's in his 30s. And I mean, from what I saw, he looked like he had lost some weight, but his previous fight, he looked like he really gained a lot of weight. So so there's that also. Maybe the discipline's not there. Of course, it's probably more difficult to stay disciplined if you're just kind of hanging on to a career. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect much from Miller at this point.
You know, when he tested positive, especially the first time in the Anthony Joshua fight, it was several banned substances. It wasn't like it was just one individual substance. It was several. It was multiple. Do you think, you know, from a general perspective, these fighters, whether they take one or they take several, like Big Baby Miller, do you think they really think they're going to get away with it? Or is it something that they feel like maybe their trainer or their nutritionist like gave them and they really had nothing to do with it? Like how should we categorize these, I guess, excuses or anything like that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? Because it's such a lot of this has to do with who they trust and who their strength and nutritionist is and their trainers and you know, essentially how shady they are. But I don't know, man. I mean, I find it hard to believe that you're taking banned substance knowingly and think you're just gonna pass it, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's always difficult to tell. And then, of course, the other side is you're a professional athlete. You should know exactly what is banned and what you're doing to not do that, right? So I don't know. It just doesn't make sense logically to be like, this is my life-changing fight, presumably for millions of dollars. And if I truly believe that I could do something here, even if he weren't to beat Anthony Joshua, at least he becomes more of a name, right? For him to knowingly take that, I mean, that's beyond dumb if he knowingly took it. But once again, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? Hard to tell what exactly is going on within their camp.
So Andy Ruiz, it was actually during that time frame of the Miller AJ fight. So as soon as Miller got popped in that fight and lost his opportunity, Andy Ruiz was coincidentally scheduled on our show during like that week. And he's also a heavyweight, and he was coincidentally fighting like the week after. So that's why he was on the show, you know, to talk about his upcoming fight and, you know, what his plans are in the heavyweight division. And he said on our show, if our listeners want to go back, it was obviously around this AJ Big Baby Miller time. Andy Ruiz even says, he's like, oh, I just literally like within the last hour or so, I messaged Eddie Hearn on Instagram, and I said, hey, I'll step in for Miller and fight AJ. Right. And sure enough, about, you know, a couple days later, there was reports that that was being negotiated, and then like a week later, Andy Ruiz, I was after his fight. He won his fight, and then like a week after, I think he landed the fight. But I remember like it was yesterday. He said it on our show. He's like, yeah, like an hour ago, I messaged Eddie Hearn, and then he got the fight. He stopped Anthony Joshua and then changed his life forever. I mean, right, yeah. You know, with the history that he had by winning the belts. I mean, what did you think about, especially, I'm assuming you're a Mexican American. Yeah. You know, what did you think of Andy Ruiz's win?
Man, I mean, that's one of the top 5 moments in boxing that I've experienced. Right. I mean, I put it up there with Chavez beating Meldrick Taylor in the last second. I'm trying to think which other fights. Probably the first Margarito Cotto fight was big. I mean, obviously that's kind of changed because of what happened subsequently. Probably the Barrera beating Nas. But yeah, it's up there to me, man. And I mean, I watched that at night, and at that point, my daughter was 2 years old, so I kind of had to be quiet because she was asleep. But man, I mean, I was jumping in my living room, right, trying not to be as trying to be as quiet as possible. And that was a great was a great moment personally for boxing, and just having a Mexican American heavyweight champion. And I don't know, man, I always feel like that fight, I mean, we're talking about it now with Big Baby Miller. It might be like an interesting documentary of how those three fighters' life changed for better or worse with that fight, right? That Baby Miller's just kind of, I don't know, he's kind of like in the backwaters now with boxing, and Anthony Joshua seems to have lost his confidence, and Andy Ruiz seems to have, I don't know if still, but at least for a year, he seems to have lost his discipline, right? That there's like, which I understand that you're kind of hanging on to a career, and then all of a sudden you have all your dreams come true and you're making millions. I imagine it must be difficult, but yeah, man. I mean, by itself, that was a great moment, and then conversely, the rematch was just a huge letdown. Just like, and I mean, it wasn't difficult to say this, but once he weighed in and didn't take off his shirt, and he weighed in, however, I think it was like 15 pounds or something overweight. Then we were like, oh, okay, well, I don't know about this one.
Yeah. I think you were one of many to have that reaction. And then obviously Andy Ruiz, after he said in interviews that he didn't really train properly and he was overweight. Right. So unfortunately, that's what happened. But the first fight, if we just focus on the first fight, obviously was a moment in time in the sport of boxing. Like you said, it was definitely a top moment in the history of boxing. So that was very cool. Also on the card, John O'Carroll gets the unanimous decision win over Miguel Mariaga in a 130-pound fight. Carroll won the fight by unanimous decision by scores of 98-92, 100-90, and 99-91. Mariaga landed some significant shots, actually, and opened up a cut besides Carroll's left eye. But Carroll was able to overcome that and cruise to unanimous decision win. Mariaga has been used a lot by Top Rank and on ESPN within like the 126 to 135 weight divisions. So he's one of those fighters that kind of just rotates. So he's fought a lot of the big names between those weight classes, 126 to 135. But at 130 pounds, you got like Valdez, obviously Shakur Stevenson just moved up to 135, but he was the guy at 130, especially after his win over Oscar Valdez. Who do you think, Roberto, is the guy right now at 130 pounds?
I think it's still Valdez. I know Stevenson just handled him very, very easily, right? That was from what I remember, that was a shutout from what I scored. If anything, if you were being best case scenario, he won one, maybe two rounds. But Stevenson's kind of like a generational talent, I think. Not that Valdez isn't, but he's an entirely horrible matchup for him. So now that I would say Valdez. Valdez is I kind of thought what's his name was going to be Valdez. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. That he knocked him out during the pandemic, the bubble. Another Mexican.
Yes, it's another Mexican. He's another Mexican fighter. Oh yeah, that was a great fight because Valdez kind of knocked him out, backing up. He knocked him out backing up.
So I thought Valdez would lose that one. So that showed me a lot. So I would say Valdez overall.
Yeah, and Valdez actually has an upcoming fight as well. And then going back to John O'Carroll's win, Carroll has now won 6 straight fights since his last loss to Maxie Hughes in August of 2020. He is now ranked 5th in the WBA rankings at 130 pounds. Mariaga, at 36 years old, has lost 4 of his past 5, but they've all been by 10 rounders, unanimous decision wins. Touching on that, that's an interesting question I'd like to ask you, Roberto. Is that you look at these fighters who, for example, Mariaga, who's lost 4 of his last 5, but he's lost them all by decision. So he's went the distance in all of them. Do you think that this helps promoters still use fighters? How much would it affect a promoter to use a fighter as an opponent for another fighter if, let's just say, for example, Mariaga had lost his last 4 of his last 5 fights, but they were all by knockout.
Right. Yeah, and before I forget, it's Berchelt.
Yes, Miguel Berchelt. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, he's I mean, that's what he is now, an opponent. And so long as he's a tough out, right? He's essentially kind of like a gatekeeper at this point. So yeah, man. I mean, so long as he doesn't get knocked out and he gives tough fights, I mean, that's perfect to be used by promoters.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of opponents like that within the sport. So, but a lot of them make a career out of it. So it works out for them. They get consistent paydays and they get fights. So I guess it works out for them in the long run. Also, this past Saturday, from the Walter Pyramid at Cal State Long Beach in Long Beach, California, on DAZN, a Golden Boy Promotions card. So this was initially, like we talked about just before we started recording, this was initially supposed to be headlined by Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez and Gabriel Rosado. But Ramirez, the day before at the weigh-in, missed weight by, I believe, over 12 pounds, if I remember correctly. So it was a lot. It wasn't like it was like 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. This was obviously a lot. When you got wind of that, Roberto, that Ramirez had missed weight and you found out it was by over that much, what was your reaction?
I was both surprised and not surprised. I was surprised. First of all, I was not surprised because in a previous fight, he had rehydrated to something above 200 pounds. If I remember correctly. So, he's a big guy just naturally. And the part that I was surprised was, I figured, 12 pounds, that's like you're either not training or you're training but not changing your diet at all. You're just, and Rosado is right there. He's there to lose, right? I mean, he's an opponent at this point. He's a name. So yeah, I was surprised that he came out and so far overweight that even Golden Boy's like, all right, well, I guess the fight's canceled. There's no way around this. So yeah, man, it was disappointing. Especially with so much talk going back to before he fought Bivol of him, supposedly salvaging the Mexican pride or whatever, and so yeah, that was definitely disappointing.
So what's your take on because I mentioned it would have been different if it was like 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, maybe 3 pounds. Like we've seen that before. It's a little bit more common, but when it's over 12 pounds, it starts to make you think as somebody out from the outside looking in, as a fan, as a spectator. If you're overweight by that much, that means that there was a big difficulty with the weight cut. Is this something when it happens in events, in boxing or even MMA? Is this something that you think that, the promoter or the fighter himself should be able to report to like the state commission or whoever is regulating that event, saying, hey, you know what? My weight cut's not going that well. I'm not going to make the weight cut by next Saturday or 2 Saturdays from now. If being able to recognize your health and your body, instead of waiting until the 11th hour, and then the promoter and the broadcaster and all that announces, hey, you know what? He missed the weight. We're going to have to cancel this event. What do you think about essentially what I'm asking is, what do you think about promoters or something like that, or broadcasters waiting until the 11th hour when, if you kind of just speculate here, if he misses it by this much pounds, 12 pounds, if you go back to like a week before, there was obviously an issue. Is that something that should be relayed to the fans, to the venue, saying, hey, he's not going to make it by next week or in 2 weeks. So, what's your take on that?
I mean, ideally there would be some type of mechanism for a check-in, but I mean, all these, maybe not all of them, but a lot of these boxers, feel like they have a system of making weight that works until it doesn't, right? And then, I'm always surprised, maybe not surprised, but you hear, I guess the last one I heard about this was Errol Spence, that for the first time in his career, he's working with a nutritionist, right? And you hear this about boxers all the time. It was like, for the first time in my career, I'm cutting weight right. And to me, that's just like, man, you've just been like suffering, killing yourself, trying to make weight. That's to me, that's what that says, that you got to the point that you're so desperate that you're like, all right, I'm going to have to pay someone else to kind of help me along. So, yeah, I mean, ideally this would be known before the last weigh-in, but like I said, a lot of these guys have a system that works for them until it doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. By the 12 pounds when we saw it over here, was obviously a big surprise. And it was unfortunate, especially for the fans who wanted to see those two fighters or any of those two fighters in person. What's your take on somebody like Gabe Rosado? Because we talked about Mariaga just before this, who just fought also this weekend. Rosado's also kind of been in a similar place, but for a lot longer, where he's kind of been the opponent on the other side for promoters, but he's I guess if you want to call him a reliable opponent, and he has like a resume in terms of he's been in there with some of the biggest names from 154 to 175, which is crazy to say. But what's your take on somebody like Gabe Rosado as a fighter in the sport?
I mean, I love watching him fight, but I also think it's getting to the point where it might be a little dangerous. He's lost his last several fights. I think the one fight that he won was against Becky
the Bully,
and that was, I mean, he was getting beat that whole fight. That was kind of, I mean, I hate to call it a lucky shot, but that was a one-punch knockout that surprised everyone. So yeah, man. I mean, it's I don't know. I was kind of not looking forward. I mean, I was probably going to watch the fight, but I wasn't. It's getting to the point where you're like, man, you might get really hurt out here, especially with someone like Zurdo, who, as we said, comes in rehydrated, over 200 pounds, and is just a huge guy. So, I mean, hopefully, I don't know. I mean, the boxers are always the last ones to know, right? We've heard this several times now from every boxer who sticks around, right? That they're much more disciplined this time, or that they changed. It's essentially that they changed whatever wasn't working up until now, and I mean, the problem is that it's aged. I mean, all of a sudden, your reflexes get dulled a split second, and that's the difference between getting knocked out or lasting the entire fight.
Do you think that Ramirez should move to cruiserweight to 200 pounds, or do you think that because obviously that's the biggest, I guess, gap in any of the weight classes is between light heavyweight 175 and then 200 pounds, or it might have been, I don't know if I think they dropped it to 190 or 195, but either way, it's a bigger gap than usual. Do you think that just based off of this missing weight over 12 pounds, you think he should just move up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure what there is for him at I mean, unless he's gonna get a rematch with Bivol, which or better Biev, which I don't see why. I don't see how any of those fights go any different. He's seemingly killing himself to make weight. I mean, at this point, you might as well move up, I think.
Yeah. He's a big guy, and he's been a big guy for years. Even when he was fighting at 168, he was a big guy then. So we'll see how that works going forward for him. I'm sure they're going to try to get him back in the ring in the next couple months, but I wonder if maybe it's a catch weight, maybe like 185 pounds, or maybe they just move him to cruiserweight. Because it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate him going forward. But obviously that event was canceled as the main event. So the co-main event in a super lightweight matchup between Mercito Gesta and Joseph Jojo Diaz Jr. Gesta got the split decision win by scores of 99-91, 98-92, and then there was a score for Diaz of 97-93. So if you didn't watch this fight and you just hear those scores, you think, okay, what happened? Who actually won here? I don't know if you caught the fight at all, or maybe the highlights of this matchup, Roberto. I think Diaz was the betting odds favorite just because he has the world championship pedigree. He's been in more high profile fights, but Gesta has been in there with Jorge Linares. He was in there a couple years ago here in Inglewood, California, at the Forum. So Gesta's been in there with some tough competition too, but. If you kind of compare both their resumes, Diaz has obviously been in there with a little bit tougher fight, so he was a betting odds favorite. But Gesta pulls out the split decision win. What'd you think about this fight, especially looking at all those cards and thinking, okay, who actually won this fight? What do you think?
This one I didn't watch, man. I've been watching the World Baseball Classic, so
right.
On that one. But I will say that it does feel like we're on the downside of Jojo Diaz's career, right? That he's. I mean, I'm glad he got a title, but it seems like he's a tough guy. He's been in some really tough fights, and he's just not at that notch anymore, right? So I think we're in a different phase in his career now, where obviously he's struggling with Gesta or losing to Gesta. So yeah, see with Diaz.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think Diaz, he's still a young guy. I think he's not even 30 yet, but we've talked about him on our podcast before, Mike and I. But Joseph Diaz has also had a lot of outside of the ring issues, civil and domestic issues, which obviously doesn't help at all. So maybe it's affecting his psyche and his training and all that in the ring. So obviously we've seen that before over the years where fighters have issues outside the ring, and then it starts affecting them in their career during their fights. So, hopefully it all kind of gets sorted out for Jojo. But yeah, he's having some issues right now, and he needs to get a hold of those. But Gesta, obviously this is Gesta's biggest win of his career so far. So Gesta is now probably in line for a bigger fight with a bigger name. And we'll see how a Golden Boy moves him forward here in 2023. In the co-main event, Oscar Duarte improves to 25-1-1 with 19 KOs as he gets the 8th round KO over Alex Chi-Town Heat Martin, who takes the 5th loss of his career. This was a super lightweight bout at 140 pounds. And then also Eric Tudor remains undefeated at 8-0 with 6 KOs as he gets the unanimous decision win over Daimani Kato Kane, who takes the 1st loss of his career. The scores of 78-74 twice and 80-72. Tudor was cut by an accidental headbutt in the 2nd round. So he had to overcome that type of adversary early in his career, and finish out the fight to a unanimous decision victory. And also Hawaii's Dalius Kalipu, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm probably wrong, but he remains undefeated early in his career, 4-0 with 3 KOs with the unanimous decision win over Jonathan Perez by scores of 60-52 on all 3 judges' scorecards. So obviously Golden Boys still continue with the event on DAZN. They wanted to salvage it. I was honestly personally looking forward to the Gesta Diaz fight more than the Ramirez Rosado. So I was kind of glad. And I think also Jojo Diaz missed weight, if I remember correctly. I think he also missed weight too, and then they reached some type of agreement with Gesta, so that fight still went on. But I think he also missed weight too. But luckily that fight wasn't canceled. They were able to salvage the event here in the Los Angeles area. And then also fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 25th of March, from the Manchester Arena in Manchester on Sky Sports in the UK. WBA cruiserweight matchup. Lawrence Okoli, 18-0, goes up against David Light. So it's a battle of undefeated, 18-0 versus 20-0. So this is what I want to get your take on, Roberto. Lawrence Okoli is a cruiserweight. His name is a little bit bigger over there in the UK. And he was previously with Eddie Hearn in Matchroom Boxing and DAZN, right? And he recently split up with Eddie Hearn in Matchroom and went to go sign with a promoter named Boxer. who has a broadcasting contract with Sky Sports. Sky Sports, I'm sure as you know, is a big channel in the UK and Europe. They're kind of maybe like the ESPN of that area. They're very, very huge. They're in a bunch of television homes and all that. What I wanted to get your take on is that Lawrence Okolie had said in an interview recently that he made the switch because he was tired of telling people how to find him on DAZN, to download an app, to put in a password. He was tired of that, and he felt that he wasn't getting the visibility that he deserved. And now he can go to some like a big channel like Sky, where he feels, oh yeah, he can tell people just turn to this channel. What's your take on that? Like a fighter saying something like that, especially with somebody like DAZN, because obviously we're in that streaming age. ESPN has their ESPN Plus, obviously, and then DAZN obviously entered the picture, and they're still very heavily streaming. What's your take on that statement from a fighter like him?
There's probably something to it. It's a lot easier, obviously, just to turn in a fight of even if you had to pay for it, right? To know that, like, if you want to watch boxing, you turn on to HBO or Showtime. And now, if you got to get on the app or whatever, and then, it's not like it's a pain in the ass to download the app, but also if it is that extra step, right? And if you're kind of like a casual fan, I guess, that probably affects how many people tune in. I mean, there's from what I know, DAZN doesn't really release how many people watch their fights. So, I mean, I'd assume that if they were getting the same amount of pay-per-view fights for a Canelo, that they would probably publish that. So, yeah, there's probably something to that.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're right. And then DAZN doesn't release their viewing numbers. They have a couple times since their inception, but it's because obviously they were proud of the number. So that's pretty much how we see it with broadcasters and promoters. When it's a significant number that they're very, very proud of, they'll put it out there, whether they're a public company or not. They'll put it out there. But DAZN obviously is privately held, so there's no reporting requirements or anything like that. That they have to publish their numbers. But also the interesting thing is, and I wanted to get your take on this, is that DAZN, I don't know if you saw the news, but DAZN within the last week or so, a couple days actually, DAZN just announced a partnership that their app or their channel essentially will now be available on Sky Sports in the UK. So people can turn directly to that DAZN channel instead of buying an account and put in a password and all that and downloading an app. So they made some type of partnership with Sky to have their own actual channel that people can just turn to. What does that tell you about, somebody like DAZN going that route? Because when they came into the boxing world, into the sporting world, I believe in 2018, they had a campaign saying, the death of cable and all that, streaming is the way to go, the death of pay-per-view. But now, a couple years later, they bought a channel with essentially their competitor on Sky Sports. What's your take on that?
I think it is inevitable that it's all going to go streaming, but also I don't think at the rate that people expect it to go. I don't know. There's just something I think about just the ease of watching boxing, right? Or even stumbling onto boxing while you're changing channels. You're like, oh, I didn't, there's nothing else to watch. We'll watch this kind of thing. Whereas baseball, for example, on a random Tuesday night, you could just watch baseball. So, yeah, I mean, I think, they wouldn't have done it had it been working the other way, I feel.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, we'll see how it all pans out. But obviously people thought it was a very interesting decision to make. So we'll see how that happens going forward. And also this upcoming weekend from the Save Mart Arena in Fresno, California on ESPN, a top-ranked promotions card. Jose Ramirez, 27-1, goes up against Richard Comey, 34-1 in a 140-pound matchup. So what do you think about this fight, Roberto? And where does the winner go from here within the 140-pound division?
I don't know. I think this is kind of a fight of just kind of the loser is essentially just not a serious contender at that weight. I mean, I wouldn't mind watching another. I wouldn't mind watching Ramirez fight Prograis or. I mean, the fight against Joshua Taylor was pretty good, even though he got knocked out. I think it was the second knockout. That was kind of a controversial one, right? When the referee broke him up and that was a pretty good fight. So I wouldn't mind watching any of those fights again, right? Especially see what happens with Lopez and Taylor, and somebody's eventually gonna have to fight Prograis here, and I mean Ramirez. I'd love to watch that.
You think Prograis is the best fighter at 140 pounds today?
I think. I mean the Taylor fight. He seems like, if you were just to watch, you're just to judge it based on who had the most damage. I mean, Taylor's face was all jacked up. I don't know if I would call him the best, but I mean, there's a reason people aren't fighting him, I think. Now, part of that might just be whatever promotional deal he has going on or lack thereof, but nobody's rushing to fight Prograis. And I hope one of these guys, actually, I hope somebody fights him soon.
Absolutely, yeah. Prograis, he's one of those guys that, like you said, the whole promotional issue, maybe there's an issue with that, but he's also very dangerous. He's also a very dangerous guy, as I've seen from his last fight here in Carson, California, at the StubHub. It's now the Dignity Health Sports Park or something like that. It changes names every year, but so obviously Ramirez, I think he's a favorite going into this fight against Comey. Comey's obviously been also rotated with fighters between 135 and 140. He got knocked out by Teofimo Lopez in like the second round a couple years back. That was a big win for Lopez. Really kind of propelled him forward into the Lomachenko fight. Ramirez is obviously trying to find his footing again after losing to Taylor. So, let's see how much longer he can last at 140 pounds, because Taylor's a big guy. He's bigger than Ramirez, and he's already said that it's difficult for him to make 140. So, maybe he'll move up to 147 and everything. So, also on the card, Sinisa Estrada versus 23-0 also against Tina Reprecht for the WBC, WBA minimum weight titles. That's also on the Top Rank on ESPN card. Going to the PBC on Showtime pay-per-view, Roberto. David Benavidez and Caleb Plant for the WBC interim super middleweight title. What's your take on this fight?
Man, I've been kind of going back and forth. I see it as a 50-50 fight. I think naturally, the side of me that leans towards Benavidez is just how big he is, right, and strong, and all of the physical advantages that he has seemingly. On the flip side, I mean, he hasn't really fought much, right? You see the same replay of him kicking the shit out of who was it, Porky? I forgot his last name, but that one flurry of like 5 straight shots. So I mean, that's the only hesitancy that's making me pause on this, that he hasn't really fought much and plans. Obviously he's fought in a little bit of competition. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. If I had to pick now, I would lean to Benavidez.
By stoppage or by decision?
I think by stoppage. But I mean, we're getting a lot of great fights these early months, but when this was first announced, or even last year, this was like one of the dream fights, right? That was like, man, if only they could make that fight, and now it's happening, and I'm really looking forward to it this Saturday.
Absolutely, and we'll see obviously how much Caleb Plant has learned from his loss to Canelo last year, because he says he learned a lot from that. So it's definitely an interesting fight, and obviously the winner is also has a chance for a matchup against Canelo, whether it's Caleb Plant in a rematch or David Benavidez for the first time It kind of keeps their hopes alive again. In the co-main event, Cody Crowley versus Abel Ramos in a 147 welterweight pound fight. Contender series here, so this is definitely a good fight. And then also Jesus Ramos, 19-0, goes up against Joey Spencer, 16-0, in a super welterweight, not title fight, just super welterweight belt. And then Chris Colbert, 16-1, goes up against Jose Valenzuela in a lightweight fight. So for the hardcore boxing fan, this undercard is actually very good. Obviously headlined by David Benavidez and Caleb Plant in a super middleweight matchup at 168 pounds. So it's overall a really good card, especially for the hardcore boxing fans. So it's on pay-per-view. It's probably going to be $75, $80, but for the hardcore boxing fan, as I mentioned, it's a big card. Rounding off as we head to the finish line here, Roberto, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk. Is it happening this year or not? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's hard to tell. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes only because there seems to, so much of this is just based off social media, but both sides at least seem to be talking with the contract, right? It's not some made up thing of where it was with the supposed fight between Wilder and Joshua versus Fury that was supposed to have happened or supposedly in talks last year. So I think so. I think Usyk definitely. I think both of them want to be undisputed. I think Usyk is much more. I don't know if he's much more serious about it, but he hasn't lost the benefit of the doubt, kind of like with Fury, right? Because at least with me, I feel like he's it's always something with him, but yeah, I'm gonna remain optimistic that with so many other fights, good fights happening, that will pressure them to actually make this and have it done here in the next month or so.
And then also Devin Haney and Lomachenko are scheduled to fight on May 20th in Las Vegas. What's your quick take on that fight?
I think Haney's. I think Lomachenko is obviously older now, and Haney's proved himself with what he's willing to do. Right, he's basically spent his last year in Australia. So yeah, I think Haney's special talent.
And then I say the best news for last. So something that's been talked about the last couple of days. Adrian Broner has recently announced that he's signed with the great Don King, who's been around boxing for so many years. What's your take on that?
Man, I just don't see how this ends well. That's my take on that. Either I don't know, Broner really must want to fight, but I don't know. It's just confounding, right? That first of all, that he would sign with King, and really that King's kind of still around in business with his reputation. But I don't know, man. Broner's one of those where you're like you do hope for the best, because there seems to be he seems to struggle at times, right? So hopefully things work out for him.
Absolutely. Well, Roberto, we definitely appreciate you joining us here on the last round. I know we've had you scheduled for quite a few weeks now, so we appreciate you jumping on. Before we end the show here, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you and follow you on social media, where they can find all your work. The floor is yours, man.
Basically just through Twitter, at @R_Andrade Franco, all one word. And there I post all whatever work I'm doing. And if you're a Cowboy fan during the season, you'll get to make fun of me as I get my hopes up, or watch the fights or the World Baseball Classic as we're watching now, and hopefully Mexico pulls this out.
They're up 4-3, I believe. I got an alert on my phone right now, so they're up 4-3. So in the 8th inning. So hopefully, as of this recording, they pull out the win. But once again, Roberto, we appreciate you jumping on here on the Last Round podcast. For our listeners, like we usually do, go ahead and follow us at the Last Round 12 across social media, and we'll be back next week with all your regular previews and reviews and news and notes. This is is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.